So welcome to the first Flutter challenge, and basically what this is where you will find a UI design that I will give to you guys, and then I will look through your code, and then I will do like a review on your code, whether I will comment on your code or not through GitHub, I think through pull request, and then after that I will probably give advice and showcase the best code, and we'll go through why it's the best code and what things you should follow and you should not do. So for this example over here, I have a design that is created by Ghulam Rasul, and this design is called a fashion mobile app design. So we're going to focus more on the design that is on the profile over here. So I have created my version on the right, and it looks pretty similar to what we have on the design. So for this challenge, I'm going to review on how to create this design. I think it's pretty simple, and what you should look out for, or what you should do in order for you to improve in your Flutter code design, because what Flutter developers do part of the time is to get the UI into actual code into the app. So let's get started. So first of all, there are two things that is overlapping, which is the background and the foreground. So the background over here is the image of the person's profile, while the foreground is the details of how many comments, likes, and views of this profile page. At the same time, you will see the name and the description of the profile person, and also a follow button. So what we need to do is we need to create this overall structure, which is called a stack. So a stack allows us to stack the different layers of the app. So we have a simple stateless widget that is called the profile page, and then we're going to add a stack. And then we have the background and the foreground. So the background will be an image that is pretty simple. So the image will be from a URL that I will probably give to you guys for the challenge, but for now this is just a simple tutorial. So I have the image URL over here. It's from Unsplash. Then at the same time, I'm going to make use of the height of the simulator over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out the media query. So the media query requires the build context. So I'm going to have the media query, and then I'm just going to take the height. So if you were to do this kind of code where you will have the media query, and then you will assign it to a variable, and then after that you create another variable to get the height. This is an example of dry code. So dry code is just one aspect of someone who has coded professionally for quite a while. So if you were to do this, then I guess it's a good indicator that you have worked with other developers so far. So just a tip for you there. Then at the same time, the stack has a children, and then this requires a image widget, which is from our image URL. And then the fit is the fit height, which is basically is going to expand according to the height of the current screen, and we're going to take the height of the whole screen. So let's save this, and you can see we have our background. Now the next thing is we are going to focus on the foreground itself. So in every app that you have created so far, good looking apps usually have an overall padding or space, because it actually makes the app look so much nicer and more valuable. So that's why we're going to add a simple padding around the whole foreground. So inside our stack, what we are going to do is we're going to create a simple padding, and then in this padding we're going to add a edge insets.all. So this edge insets.all has 15 on all sides, and if it's a number that is fixed, then I will highly recommend you to use the const. So this allows you to have more optimized rebuilds, I would say. And if this is const, then you can put a const padding as well. So this is just another thing that would help optimize the rebuilds of your app, because this will be compiled ahead of time rather than just in time, if I'm not wrong. I have no idea actually. All right. So now we have the padding. The next thing is inside our screen over here, we could see a couple of different areas like the app bar. You could see that this is, you could see the sidebar, and then you could see that this is like a description box. So all in all, these kind of areas or widgets are structured in a way from top to bottom, which makes use of the column. So let's create a column. So inside our padding, I'm going to add in a child. So now we are not able to use the const for our padding since we have a dynamic child. So we're going to add in column with the children, and then that is most about it. All right, so if you were to save this, nothing really happened because it's all structure layout. And then now we're going to start from the top. So as you can see over here, there is this app bar, but I put in a question mark because do you think this is an app bar? So I will not put an app bar on top because we are using the image as the background. So we're going to recreate it using a simple row. And inside this row, we have like an icon button, which is the back button. And then we'll have a spacer, which is a widget that takes all of the space according to the main axis alignment. So for the row, the main axis alignment is from the left to right. So it will take as much width as possible. And lastly, we have another icon button. So it's pretty simple. So let's create a row with the icon buttons and spacer. So inside this children, we will have a row. And then inside this row, we will have the icon buttons. And the icon uses the arrow back iOS sign. And for the right side, it uses the more icon that is on the vertical side. So if you were to save this, you could see there is an error. So the error says that the icon button requires a material widget. So inside our stack, we don't have a material widget. So what we can do is we can wrap this padding with a material widget as such. So we're going to wrap it, and then we go to add in a material widget. And then if we were to save this, now our material widget covers our whole image, because the material widget, think of it as like a container. And then for our colors over here, it has defaulted to a gray color. So what we can do is we can actually make our material color to a transparent. So we can type in colors.transparent, and then if we were to save this, now everything looks normal. And then you could see that there is the vertical button over here, and then you could see the arrow back iOS, and then you could see the more vertical icon. However, we have some spacing issue at the top. So how are we going to space out according to the space required from the status bar? So what we can do is we can make use of this thing called the padding top. So we can get the padding top from the media query. So I'm going to create a variable that's called app bar height. And then from our media query, it has all the different paddings. And then we're going to make use of the padding top. So the padding top refers to the space that is used for the status bar. So what we can do is we can just create a simple sized box just below our row. And then if you were to save this, now you could see that it is much nicer. Okay. So if you want to create a safe area, yet you still want an image that covers from top to bottom, I will highly recommend you to use a stack. And then if you want to have space, then the size box with the app bar height, or you could say the status bar height to space out. And then you can create your own app bar as well. So the next part is we're going to focus on the size box. So between this between this sidebar and this app bar, we have spacing. So usually I will put a sized box as well. So for the sized box, I'm going to use the height of the screen, and then I will divide it by 10. So basically I will just put 10% off. So once I'm done with size, so why I use divided by 10 is because I use 10%, and this is another way for me to see whether this person or this developer knows some form of knowledge of dynamic sizing. Basically, you use percentages rather than hard coding certain numbers. So if you were to have a smaller sized screen and if you were to hard code it, then you might face an overflow issue. So that's why I always put percentages. This is the same as times 0.1, right? So it's the same. Now, so let's remove the confusion and just put in times 0.1. So once we added the size box, the next thing is we're going to add in this column. And in this column, we have a couple of things, which is the icon, button, and text. So let's go add some columns over here. So let's add a column in a column. And then inside this column, we will have some children widgets. And inside these children widgets, let's create one section of the sidebar, which is the icon, button, and text. So let's add in an icon button, and then the icon can be an icon widget from the icons asset, which is the icons comment. And then for the on pressed, we can just leave it as a anonymous function. And then we can add a simple text widget. And for the number, we're going to add the number 3. So let's put in a string. That's number 3. So let's save this and see how it looks like. So currently the column is now in the middle. So what we can do is we can push it to the left or to the start. Alright, so for this column over here, if you were to on your debug, painting is in the middle. So is it the mean axis alignment or the cross axis alignment? So it's actually the cross axis alignment that makes it to the center. So cross axis alignment for the column is basically where you're going to place your children widgets, either from the left, from the center, or for the right. So if you were to put in the cross axis alignment and adding it at the start, then we can place our children widgets accordingly. But as you can see over here, our text widget has been moved to the left instead of the whole section over here. So what does this mean? So the cross-axis alignment is only affected to the column that we have created over here. So that's not what we want. What we want is this whole column to move to the left. So instead of this column with the icon, button, and text, what we need to do is to have the surrounding column that we have over here and make it to the left. So we can just copy this cross-axis alignment start and then place it in our column on top over here. And now if we were to save this, alright, so now you could see that our icon, button, and text over here has been moved to the left, while our app bar over here does not change because we have a spacer that takes as much space as possible, so it doesn't really move that much. So the next thing is, are we going to do the rest while hard coding it or while using clean code? So clean code basically means that we are going to make code that's easily maintainable. So what do I mean by that? What if we were to, create and just copy and paste this icon, button, and text 3 times, which works. But the thing is, what if there is another one and then there is some confusion around, and then we will probably have to delete one in the future. So you probably have to delete and add and delete again. So what I will usually do, and what I think will really make someone be different from the beginner developers, is that you actually create a class object. So I'm going to create a class object that's called an icon, button, data. So it has an icon, which is an icon data, basically the icon assets, and then an integer that has an amount. So the integer that's right below the icon over here. So I'm going to untoggle the debug painting. And then after that, I'm going to create a list of icon buttons with the different amount. So I have the comment, the favorite or the heart over here, and then there's this remove red eye over here. So for me, I just like to use an icon that makes sense. So the eye means that there is people watching you or the profile page. And then with this icon buttons, we are then going to add it inside our column. So how are we going to do that? That's a very good question. So we can make use of this thing called the spread operator. So what the spread operator does is that it actually removes the list into its own element. So what I mean by that is this will actually work the same as if we were to add it inside its own list. So this will just add it inside the element. It is the same as this. So why do I need to put a spread element? Is because we're going to use a simple for in loop for our icon buttons. So this will allow us to loop through the different icon buttons data, and then this will just render the different icon buttons with the text accordingly. So I have added in a for in loop, and then our element variable name is button data. Let me put in a final over here. And then we can just add in the different icons and the different amount as such. So for the icon button, I can put button data.icon. And then for the amount button data, I'm going to add in the button data amount. And since it's an integer, we can just use the dot to string. And now if you were to save this, you could see that the different icon buttons and its amount has actually been rendered nicely. So using the for in loop, you can actually hide certain things if you want through the app itself without you actually pushing a change if you want to. So for example, there is if you don't want anyone to see how many people actually saw this profile page but yourself, then what you can do is you can just comment it out and then it will just disappear. So for this case, what I need to do is I need to hot restart so that at least I can see the changes. Alright, so now you could see that it has changed nicely. And then another thing is that what if I want to have spacing in between my icon buttons and my text? And if you do not use the for in loop method, then you will probably have to create sized box for each individual icon button and text widget. But because we are using the for in loop, we can just add in the missing widget that we want for our each individual section. So if we were to save this, now we will have a sized box for each of our, I would say there is spacing in between our buttons section over here. Alright, so once we are done with this, the next thing is we're gonna create a spacer in between our description and our sidebar over here. So the spacer over here is a flexible widget, meaning that it takes up as much space as possible within its own constraint, meaning that if there is this empty space, it will take this whole empty space. So why I use spacer is because, like I said earlier, if you have created apps for different screen sizes, spacer or flexible widgets or even expanded widgets allow us to just use the space according to the screen constraint. So just put in the spacer widget, and now we can move on to the next one. So we will have this model description box, and we're gonna use this clip R rect. So to make this fancy blurry image over here, we start with the clip R rectangle. So imagine this as a container that can just cut through any form of widget. So this blurry thing is actually from a container itself, and then it uses this backdrop filter. So the container itself cannot cut the backdrop filter on the edges over here. So we need a lower or a more powerful widget that can cut through the widget itself. So you can use clip R rectangle to cut through images as well. If you were to use container, it does not really work. So clip R rectangle or clip oval are widgets that allows you to actually clip or cut out the area that you need. So these are the three widgets that we needed to use in order for us to create this blurry kind of container. So what we can do is we can create a new widget just right below our stack widget or our profile page widget, and we're gonna call this stateless widget model description. And then with this model description box, it's going to use a clip R rectangle. So I'm gonna wrap this widget with a clip R rect, and then we are going to have to make use of the border radius. So the border radius is going to be a circular 15 because we want the whole description box to be a little bit curved. And then at the same time, we want to open up this container width. So at the same time, we're going to set the width of the container. So what we're going to do is we're going to make use of the media query again in order for us to size the box. So we're going to create the width. We're going to make use of the width from the media query. And then we're going to add the width as 90%. But as you can see over here, if you've noticed, the padding that we have already created across the whole widget is 15. So due to these percentages, it will use the smallest width that it has. So if the width times 0.9 is more than the width of the screen minus the padding, then it will use the width that is the width without the width that's minus the padding. Okay, whatever. Okay. Then the next one is we're going to add in the child widget, which is the image filter blur. And we're going to make use of the backdrop filter. And this backdrop filter requires a filter. And the filter that we're going to add is this thing called the image filter dot blur. So sigma x and sigma y is basically how the blur will look like in terms of the x and y axis. So you don't have to really think much about it, but just putting the 10, but you can just put the double 10. And then if you were to save this, nothing really happens because there is no height. So the height will be rendered according to the column that we have. So the column the column that we have is a text and then a button. So let's add in a simple text inside a column. So for the backdrop filter, what we're going to do is we're going to add a child widget, which is a so we're going to add the child widget for the backdrop filter, which is the column, and then it has a children parameter, and inside it we're going to add in our text widget, and we're going to add the style of the text widget of the user profile name with the headline 5. So if you want to save this, let's see how it looks like. So now we can just hot restart again to see the actual model description box. So now we're going to add in the model description box just below our spacer over here. And then we're going to save this and see how it looks like. Alright, you could see that you could see the Gal Gadot, but it's in the center and it is very close to the bottom. So what we can do is, first of all, we want our text to be on the left. So if you remember correctly, so if you were to remember earlier, we use of this thing called the cross-axis alignment. So inside our column, we can make use of that and add in the cross-axis alignment, and we're going to push it to the left. So the column left is the start. And now if you were to save this, now you can see Gal Gadot is on the left. And we also want to put in a certain sized box for our next So the next thing is we're going to add in a simple text description about Gal Gadot. So what we can do is we can create a simple variable and let's call it the model description. And then for this model description, we're going to add in a text widget and we're going to style it according to the body text one. And we're going to add in a maximum of 4 lines. And then if you were to save this, you could see that it is very closed together. And at the same time, it is also very near to the edge of the container. So what we can do is first, we can add some padding inside our container. So let's add in a padding of h insets 15 and let's put a constant as well. So we can put const over here. Then at the same time, let's add some height. At the same time, let's add in some space by using a sized box with a height of 10 in between our title and description. Now if we were to save this, alright, it looks so much better. But the thing is at the bottom, it takes a lot of, but at the same time, it is very close to the bottom. So we want to have some spacing according to the bottom padding. So what we can do is we can create another variable inside our profile page that is referring from our media query, which is called the bottom padding. And then we can create a simple sized box with the height of the bottom padding. And this will actually elevate the whole of the description box to the top. Alright, it looks so much nicer. And lastly, we have our button over here. So you can see the button looks very, very interesting. It is all curved except on the left bottom over here. So how are we going to do it? Well, we're going to make use of this thing called the elevated button icon because it has an icon as well. So for the on press, we can just leave it as is. And the icon is a plus sign. So we can put an icon and then reference from the asset icons.add. And then for the label, it says follow. So we're going to add in a text widget that it says follow. And then if we were to save this, you could see that our icon button is on the left over here, which is not what we want. What we want is the follow button on the right over here. So what we can do is we can wrap this elevated button icon into its own row. And then inside this row, what we can do is we can shift our button. If you were to save this, it's still on the left. So how do we shift it on the right? If you were to hover over the row, the main axis alignment is at the start, which it means is on the left over here. So what we can do is we can make it to the right or the end. So let's put our main axis alignment to the end over here and save this, and you could see that it moved to the right. Alright, so now we're going to style our elevated button icon. So the elevated button icon is a new button if you guys have not used the new material buttons. But basically, we have this thing called the style parameter that requires a button style object. So let's use the button style object, and inside it, we are now going to make our buttons to be a back, and now we're going to make our button into a red color. So what we can do is we can type in the background color, and now if you were to hover over the background color parameter, it has this thing called the material state property. So what this material state property is basically if there were different interactions, what do you want to do with it? So if it's hovered, then what kind of background color would you like? If it's on pressed, what kind of color would you like? But for now, we just want all of the different interactions to be just red. So what we can do is we can make use of this material state property dot all method, and then we are returning a color. And then the color that we are returning is the shade of 700. And now if we were to save this, Alright, so it looks very close to what we want. However, you could see that inside our button, it has our text widget and then it has the icon widget. So we need to swap it by swapping this icon and label. So this is not really recommended, but for this case, we're going to... Oh, I have not seen how it looks like. Alright, so sorry if you guys can't see. No. Okay, sorry guys if you guys can't see. But yes, so basically what I've done is I created a row and then the main axis alignment at the end. So that means all of the widgets will start at the right side. And I've created an elevated button icon, which is a new button, and then use the background color to be red, so that any interaction it will just be red for the background color. And then at the same time, the icon and the label itself, we have to swap it. So like I say, I wouldn't recommend you, but it is what it is. So I have to switch it accordingly. So with the label and icon, and now if I were to save this, you could see that our left side of our button over here is a text widget, while the right side is an icon. So after that, let's have this icon into its own circle shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple stateless widget that will have this surrounding white color. And then I'm going to create this widget that is called the filled circle add icon. So what this does is basically I have a simple container with a padding surrounding it, so I have space in it, and then inside this container I decorate it by having the white color, and I can set my shape into a circle, and then its child will be the add icon, which has the size of 15 and its color black. So I'm going to add our icon and replace it with this icon widget over here. And now if I want to save this, now you can see that we have a circled icon over here. Now the next thing is we're going to create its shape for this icon over here. So now we're going to change the shape of this elevated icon over here. So what we can do is we can definitely use the shape parameter. So type in shape parameter. And then for this shape parameter, we're going to make use of this material state property, and then it uses this outlined border over here. So this outline border over here, we're gonna make use of this rounded rectangle border. So this rounded rectangle border is basically the shape of what we want. So the shape that we want is very unique, like I said. Only on the left bottom side that it is actually a pointy thingy, and the whole thing is a pill. So what we can do is we can create a simple border radius variable that uses the border radius .only method. So we only want the top left, top right, and the bottom right to be circular, while our bottom left is still pointy. So with this border radius, we can just add in inside our border radius parameter as such. And now if we were to save this, alright, you can see that our button over here looks very similar to what we want inside our design. And the last thing is we're going to add in our padding over here. So the padding is also a little bit unique, and it's going to use the material state property as well. So we're just going to add the padding, and then we need to return an edge insets, because for the padding itself it requires this edge insets geometry. So you can put edge insets or edge insets geometry, it doesn't really matter. So we're going to use the symmetric. Basically for the vertical or the top and bottom it will be 10, while the left and right will be 13. And now if we were to save this, alright, it looks so much better. And lastly, we're going to add a simple spacing, or you could say sized box, just before our row. And now if we were to save this, you could see that our description looks so much better. So all in all, I would say that this is fairly a simple design. If you know how to make use of rows to actually push your widgets to the right or left. And then for the column, You can make use of the cross-axis alignment to position it as well, and at the same time having a having a data class actually can help you make the design much more dynamic, in a sense that you can control what can be shown and what cannot be shown. And this is something that I will probably look out for to find whether you are a competent and a professional Flutter developer, because hard coding the icon buttons with the text will be very painful for you to maintain. So now I'm going to do a check. Can this design over here be shown nicely in a iPhone SE in a iPhone SE concept, in an iPhone SE size? So what I'm going to do is, for the simulator over here, I'm going to open a new simulator, which is the iPhone SE. So iPhone SE is very, very small. And if I were to do the dynamic sizing correctly, nothing should be overflown. So now I'm going to run this in our iPhone SE. I can remove this iPhone 12 Pro Max and let's see how it looks like. So as you can see over here that the iPhone SE actually, as you can see over here, the design actually fits very well in the iPhone SE size. So there isn't any overflow, and you could see that the spacer actually takes as much space as possible, and it doesn't really overflow that much. And then at the same time, for the sized box that we had for this before, the sidebar uses a percentage, and then for our description it just uses the width and height accordingly. So the height is being rendered after the text widget has been rendered with the button as well. So this is really very good design in a sense. So this is something that if you were to, so this is something expected if you were to do this kind of design for any mobile app screen. So if you were to have any overflow, you can definitely make things smaller or have less sized. But usually for this kind of case where the screen is not scrollable, this is actually pretty good. So that's about it for this challenge over here. The next time won't be like this. I hope it will probably more be into reviewing people's code and how they can definitely improve. And then at the same time, if there were a case where it's hard to do a part of a design, I'll probably go through the design I'll go through on how to build it in Flutter as well. For example, this button over here. So I'm looking for something that's easy to read and easy to understand, and it's not a lot of code, in a sense that it is too much complicated code for just a simple UI button or widget. Alright, so I'll see you in the next session for this code challenge.